welcome to Playwright, a podcast about creating and sharing new ways to play. My name is Ryan Hamann. You can call me H.
And I'm Ryan Quintal. You can call me Q.
Q, I don't really have any specific conversation topics. What have you been playing recently?
I'll tell you what I've been playing. I started in on the pieces of the Master Chief Collection I had never played, and games that people tell me are specifically really great. Halo Reach, I'm in the middle of, and Halo ODST I've got next on the docket. But yeah, these are two Halo games that I feel like I don't know anything about. I'm kind of enjoying Reach so far. It's so strange to go back to like older Halo controls that just feel so different than every shooter now.
I guess you must be on console because you're a Mac person.
Yeah, I'm playing it on. Well, I've got a PC, gaming PC as well. I've got it downloaded there, but okay. I don't know if the save transfers. I haven't tried that yet.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I should probably know that. It might not though, because I know that like we're kind of rolling out the PC versions and the Xbox versions have already been out for many years. So
yeah, I'm even wondering though,
sure.
Master Chief Collection is pretty decent about letting you just like, even if you haven't beaten the game, they're like, whatever, start at whatever mission you want, basically. So it's probably not that big of a deal.
Well, that's cool. I remember I played through Halo Reach in one sitting, and this wasn't like a midnight launch, got it home, couldn't wait to start playing. Like, I've never really been a big Halo fan. But in college, one of my roommate's friends, my friend as well, but, kind of primarily known through the roommate, came over and, had it, still relatively new. He was playing through it for the first time and decided to do a co-op run. And it was one of those where it's like, well, we played a couple levels and, always kind of like looked over like, it was pretty fun, wasn't it? But then he just was like, cool. And just kept like, thumbing through the menus and kept going. It's like, okay, I feel like I've kind of had enough, but like, I don't want to jump out because, we're doing co-op and, and I'm a very non-confrontational person. If I've had enough Halo for the evening, I'm not going to be the one to ruin the party for somebody else who's still obviously having a good time. But, ultimately we ended up getting through the entire game in that one sitting.
Wow.
And ultimately I'm glad that we did. I think it was, I think we had a good time. And also I don't think I would have finished it on my own if it wasn't, with somebody else to sit there and, do it all together. So, I think all in all worked out pretty nicely.
That's cool. It's funny. I'm kind of in a similar space of like, every time I've played a Halo, I'm generally having a pleasant-ish experience. Nothing that I'm like just totally floored by. It's a first-person shooter on a console. And probably listeners know at this point that when it comes to online competitive multiplayer, I stay about 1,000 miles away from any section like that of a game. So I'm literally just trying to engage with these games on their story, or even just like their set pieces in a way and seeing what they do. Mm-hmm. But you're touching upon this thing that I know exactly where you're coming from. Maybe people listening felt the same way, but it's this unspoken co-op gamer pact, right? Where if one person is like pushing forward and building the momentum, it almost feels impolite to be the one to say, I just can't anymore.
Yeah, right. I guess before we get into the video game pitches, I should also mention that kind of the ultimate Playwright game, which has been a favorite for probably a decade or so, just came out on Steam for free. You can pick up Frog Fractions. Finally, it is unleashed from its online Flash prison.
No,
Flash is going away.
No Flash plugin required?
No, yeah, it's entirely free to download. No reason not to. It also has a piece of hat DLC, which I guess I originally read as kind of like a nice way to throw a tip to the developer, for putting out a free game. And, it's one that I've gotten a lot of enjoyment and thought out of over the last, decade. So I wouldn't have a problem with throwing a few dollars his way. But apparently I have not tried this yet. I played through the game relatively vanilla on Steam, but I've not tried it with the hat DLC. Apparently it changes it substantially to the degree that it can be considered another sequel to Frog Fractions.
You might say it's game changing? I'll stop myself.
It is literally changing the game. They say that the Hat DLC is actually Frog Fractions 3. So Frog Fractions 2 was famously hidden inside of another game, which is a beautiful way to distribute a piece of software. You had to do something very specific in another game to basically unlock Frog Fractions 2 to play, which is great. But yeah, it's worth looking into. So anyways, if you've not played Frog Fractions already, I think there's even a Cane and Rinse issue about Frog Fractions. The game is free to download on Steam. You will not regret it. Anyways, let's get into some video game pitches. I believe you're going first today.
So my pitch this week is actually maybe more of a open-ended scenario that I think is kind of interesting to explore. I've been thinking a lot about Naughty Dog and how they've kind of come to The Last of Us Part 2, and from what I hear, maybe there's a Part 3 brewing in there somewhere. But if Naughty Dog were to do something that wasn't The Last of Us and wasn't Uncharted, what would I give them to do? And I was kind of thinking about Red Dead Redemption 2 and how that has some, historical truth in there. I was wondering, and this might be something that we'll be delicate with, but I was wondering what would it look like if Naughty Dog tried to tackle a historical dramatization of a long-form adventure as an actual game about the Underground Railroad.
Interesting. We'll go ahead and start the clock there.
I guess we could start with what it was if people don't know. So especially for non-Americans, the Underground Railroad was kind of this network or a bunch of sort of secret routes and paths that sprawled all across the sort of northern part of America, around the line where the North and the South met, where slaves who were trying to escape captivity or enslavement were going and using these routes, and the people who were operating these routes to sort of make their way to the north, a place where they would be have the potential at freedom.
All right. Yes, I love this idea. I'm always a bit wary of any time that we try to kind of add mechanical, game mechanics to moments of civil rights and kind of human tragedies and things that have happened in the past. I know that there have been games that have been kind of focused on the Holocaust tragedy. There's been a game about the Caribbean slave trade, Assassin's Creed. What was it? The expansion to Black Flag. I'm not remembering the name now. But you played an assassin who was, kind of primarily interested in freeing slaves around this Caribbean area. And I just remember a lot of kind of like think pieces coming out after that game came out that
like how it handles
said
it.
that even though, obviously you're kind of like playing the right side of history, it's still kind of like belittling or it's kind of treating the slaves like mechanical numbers, like
right.
flags that you would be collecting or money that you would be collecting, which is essentially the same thing that the slave owners would have been doing at the time, is, treating them as kind of an ends to, or a means to an end, rather than as people in and of themselves. And so, how do you balance? And I think, the Naughty Dog formula is probably really well equipped to handle this, in that, those aren't games about collection. They're personal stories about survival. I think this is worth exploring.
Well, one of the things and you can go to as we talk about this, I invite you to open up just the Wikipedia entry, right, for the Underground Railroad listeners, and kind of start scanning it, because some of the things I thought about is like, let's take the role of maybe, a family, a woman, her child, maybe she has a couple children, who are trying to navigate this railroad. Like Naughty Dog has made mechanics around having a partner meaningful, but adding in an element of, a child that does not understand the stakes, right? And a partner who would trigger AI, right? Would be noticed in the way that maybe they skirt some of those things for gameplay reasons in The Last of Us. I think maybe a way to tackle talking about this is just from the mechanic standpoint anyway, is to talk about some of the systems Naughty Dog has developed and how they could be extended or adapted to sort of recreate these sort of moments.
There's just so many kind of like tricky issues with this being a historical drama and wanting to be respectful of the people who actually kind of experienced it.
Right.
You don't want to imply that there is a, golden path through the Underground Railroad that would, necessarily lead to freedom if all the right things and all the right choices were made along the way, because, sometimes like it was a very uphill battle,
right,
with many sectors of society, both kind of private and public, being kind of firmly in opposition to these people that were pursuing their own freedom. And so, you don't, as a game designer, you don't want to ever kind of like put in unwinnable situations or unbeatable scenarios, but
right.
But yeah, at the same time, it's like,
I mean, that's that's what it was, right? In many ways.
Yeah. But anyways, I think that, well, maybe not we as two white guys, but people who at least have an interest in exploring something like this and leaving the or kind of putting the storytelling into the hands of people who are more kind of like culturally equipped to do something like this. We're just kind of exploring around the edges mechanically.
Yeah, when I think about sort of what you're talking about the happy path, right? The when you look at the map of the Underground Railroad, it's clear that there are, like, if you thought of it almost like a video game-esque map, it is not a straightforward line, right? And so there would be potentially using some of what they built upon with Uncharted 4. I haven't played Last of Us 2 yet, but the idea of making these key decisions that determine exactly what fork in the road you're going to take at different intersections, and actually creating a super replayable Naughty Dog style narrative where, not to say that there will be a best choices path, but the actual people that you meet and the, Naughty Dog has proven adept at being able to introduce a character and at least attempt to get you invested in them very quickly. So maybe who you're meeting and who you have to work with and who you lose along the way is all the sort of variables in play. Yeah, but I mean, of course, Naughty Dog would have to hire a great team of Black designers and writers and stuff to tackle some of this subject matter, because it's really not just an American story. It is very much a Black story to tell.
I think that The Last of Us 2 and The Last of Us 1 as well, you are being pursued by monsters, and the kind of degraded state of society is a hindrance to you being able to kind of effectively fight back. And that's where the tension comes from. It's like you are in a broken world trying to fight monsters who, under normal circumstances might not be a tremendous threat if the infrastructure was still in place, if the damn lights worked half the time. These zombies wouldn't be as big of a problem. In this particular scenario, it's kind of the opposite, where the individual humans that you would encounter along the way, the other kind of, the human threats that would be getting in your way are hindrances, but they're, obviously they're performing kind of monstrous actions, but they're, circumventing one of them does not make your challenge or your journey any less challenging, because ultimately the monster is society at large, and a lot of the kind of ideas and cultural concepts that it's grown to accept, and that's something that's not so easy to tackle. And so there might be more incentive to be stealthy rather than violent in this game, because if you are if you clear a room of enemies by killing them in the way that you would in The Last of Us, then potentially the negative effects of that with a society that is both still very much intact and specifically prejudiced against you, the consequences of that would be something that would pursue your characters and would be a much greater threat than any of the individual actors, kind of due to the prejudice and the kind of law of the time.
Yeah, the state of affairs. I mean, I just keep thinking about with knowing, a lot of what people talk about with The Last of Us 2 is just how dialed up the violence is. I think, this is, I think in the last couple Naughty Dog games, or maybe in all the Naughty Dog games, when I think about it, violence is something perpetrated by the antagonists and by the protagonists. And violence is a consequence of quote, bad people. And so for them to tell a story about actually a little less gray morality on the part of the protagonist here, this family, who maybe there's, I would love to see a Naughty Dog game that leaves the verb shoot completely off the table, and to see what they could do with, the idea of maybe it's that they have to lean into stealth. Maybe it's that they have to lean into talking and negotiation, but give these people different tools to deal with these situations. That feeling of knowing that you're talking to someone who can either, or potentially in contact with someone who can either save your life and your family's life or ruin it, right? And you have to extend that trust to that person. I think having mechanics around that can potentially represent that experience in some way.
And we've talked a lot about how, Ellie is motivated by revenge and Nathan Drake is a grave robber and a mass murderer. And it would be nice to have kind of a Naughty Dog game where you are kind of unambiguously in the moral right. Again, we haven't had that since Crash Bandicoot Warped?
Yeah, I guess so.
Jak and Daxter 1. Anyways, that's all the time we have on that one. What do we want to call this Underground Railroad video game?
I think that there's metaphor, maybe there's something in, I think one of the, hold on, I'm sorry. I'm reading here. One of the songs, yeah, here it is. One of the songs about the Underground Railroad is called Song of the Free. And I think that hits the right tone. I mean, I would, again, you want this thing to ultimately be a machine of creating empathy and creating lived experience. It's dramatized fiction to hit an impact. So I think that says something about the game.
I like that a lot. Song of the Free. Let's move on to my pitch for the day. What I'm bringing in is a SUPERHILT style sword fighting game. So I'm going to be brief with it and just leave it at that. Let's see what we make of it.
I love this, and thank you for rescuing me in tone of this episode. The idea of the sword fighting game, and so is this when I'm swinging? We're accelerating time, or is this kind of more still locomotion based?
Yeah, so I'm thinking kind of like in a fencing type of duel. Obviously, you can move, you can dodge, you can sway, you can move your body, but any time that you move your body, you would be advancing time. And so, you'd have to kind of factor in how to block incoming attacks, how to appropriately, hit your enemy without getting stabbed yourself, without leaving yourself open for attacks. But I'm thinking first person. I mean, VR would be ideal.
Of course, yeah.
I know that we've seen SUPERHILT in VR, and that one in VR, even just looking around, moving your head, looking behind you or to your sides to kind of get a sense of your environment does advance time as well. And so I guess, for people who aren't familiar with SUPERHILT, we shouldn't just make that assumption. It is a game where time move so slowly, it's almost at a complete stop. Time does progress little by little, but it's really just trickling along, unless you are in movement. It's a first-person shooter with a very minimalist aesthetic, but essentially time only moves when you do. And when you fire a gun, then time moves quite significantly. And so, you got people shooting at you, you're trying to shoot at people, you're trying to kind of like dodge bullets as they're coming at you in slow motion, like The Matrix or Max Payne. But essentially anytime that you're dodging, moving your body, aiming, shooting back at somebody else, you are advancing time forward and kind of losing your advantage of a kind of
the frozen
of a perspective outside of time.
Well, I think this is like ripe for, I know you're talking about fencing, which I always think of as very sort of one-on-one. There's a mat like this sort of non-lethal fencing, but of course SUPERHOT very lethal. And I'm wondering in the way that SUPERHOT can create that feeling of a bunch of people showing up into a room and rushing you with all these bullets whizzing past. I feel like this SWORDERHOT would be maybe an opportunity to recreate actually something that I feel like most games fail to recreate, which is that feeling of the Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones-esque, you're in the middle of a battlefield as a swordsman. There's axes and hammers and swords all around you, and the real feeling of, especially in VR, of, wow, I am an inch away from my life with this weapon that's in front of me. And maybe even using the accelerometer and like an Oculus controller so that how hard you've actually swung your sword based on how hard you're sort of swinging your sword. That creates not only a knockback for the enemy's weapon, but for yours, right? So there's sort of this recoil that you're creating with your own force. And I can imagine a strong enough whack, and maybe you can get somebody to do a full 360 with their sword and potentially take out another combatant.
So, I think something also worth mentioning is that SUPERHOT does have swords in it, but everything in SUPERHOT is meant to be very disposable. There's lots of weapons and ordinary objects in your environment that you can throw at enemies, and they're constantly kind of like launching their guns in the air when they die that you can pick out of the air and shoot somebody else, and everything has a very kind of limited count of ammo, and it's meant to feel more like kind of a John Wick fight of being improvisational while you go, which is definitely very cool. But I'm wondering if it makes you feel like you're not learning and connecting with weapons in the same way that you would if maybe there are just kind of like, maybe there's just one per level, or maybe you do have a couple of options, but the items don't break after 3 uses. Like, I want something where you have to really kind of like read and study the opponents instead of the priority being like, how many people can I actively dispatch with ultimately like very disposable weapons to keep the chain going.
That makes sense to me. So like what I'm thinking about this sort of, let's say it's a castle siege. We're in some sort of medieval situation, medieval fantasy. I don't know how many castle sieges were taking place with everybody running in with swords. Maybe all of them. I don't know. But the idea of maybe the only weapons are that are available to you are the ones that I guess if you took SUPERHOT, what would it feel like if we took SUPERHOT and dialed back the enemy count and up the enemy difficulty? Because SUPERHOT is very sort of one shot, one kill in many cases, right? Or in all cases. So is there a feeling of, wow, I actually have to spend time in combat with this character, and maybe that's the only way to even claim a weapon as fully defeating one of these characters, taken in a Soulsian direction? Yeah,
potentially. I think that there's there's been a couple of games that kind of come to mind. There was the For Honor game, which is kind of difficult to categorize genre-wise. A lot of people call it a fighting game because it focuses a lot on what end up being kind of one-on-one duels. A lot of people kind of classify it as a more kind of a broad action game in the style of like a Dynasty Warriors type of experience, because there are kind of hordes of lesser enemies that you're fighting as well, or almost kind of like an over-the-shoulder type of MOBA experience. It ultimately comes down to like there are combat opportunities and there are ways to kind of, like in a MOBA, mobilize your hero character against lesser computer-controlled enemies and gain advantages in that way. But ultimately you're kind of coming up against these more formidable opponents, and that's where the real kind of meat of the combat lies.
So what types of... I think like this almost is like Metal Gear Revengeance type stuff, but I wonder if, because we're playing with swords here, we get into some sort of dismemberment situation, or maybe the only way to... I love that stupid action trope that probably has never happened once in real life, but somebody kind of clapping their hands together to catch a sword, or the heroic character that's not afraid to grab a questionable piece of a blade and get their hand all cut up doing so. Yeah. So I wonder if that's like there's a weapon claiming system of that nature.
Yeah, that could be cool. Kind of another aspect I would want to bring into this is, as we talked about, kind of a one-hit kill type of system, but one that's very dependent upon like where you or the enemy is struck on the body. I think about a game like Bushido Blade, where most of the time it is just kind of like you're trying to find an opening to get that one hit in that ends your kind of opponent's, or drains. I mean, there isn't a life bar. It is just kind of like dealing with real swords. You only get one shot, as it were. And so, a lot of the game would be kind of like trying to battle away the enemy's sword or weapon, trying to deflect it with your own, or if you have a shield, depending on your loadout, but trying to find that opening to get that one solid hit in, but also having to be conscious about where you strike your opponent. Maybe you do choose to cut off a hand at the beginning to kind of reduce your opponent's options, or it would be interesting if some of the later levels would put you unarmed against an opponent with a sword, and you do have to find a way to kind of like get the sword away from them that you can kind of turn it back on them.
Yeah, and I also like the idea of what you're talking about, being invested in the weapon. Then you could start playing with the idea of maybe there's some physics to it, but weapon weight, exactly how hard you need to swing to connect, or to kind of, maybe there's a way to read the incoming swing intensity of an opponent, and you have to therefore answer with a swing of equal or more intensity. And so you almost get a Beat Saber like feeling of just how hard you need to crash into these other blades and weapons as they're being hoisted at you.
That's enough time there. Let's give it a name.
So many things have taken like sword and blade and stuff in the title. Okay, well, this is a very playwright title, so I'm going to just lead with that. SUPERHILT. I was
trying to think of any kind of way into the super hot name, and I couldn't come up with it, but I think you cracked the code there.
SUPERHILT.
All right, that'll do it. Let's go over to the community. We do have some emails today, which is very exciting. Always love receiving some of those.
Thank you so much.
We have one from Mike Esguerra who says, how about an Octodad style barber sim? And I'll start the clock there.
I think we actually talked about something similar to this a while back.
We talked about kind of like a physics style haircutting game, but didn't necessarily emphasize the clumsiness of it.
Yeah. And because
something that is worth highlighting as of the day of recording was just kind of posted by a Twitter account that I follow called OctoCurio, OCTOCURIO, who does a great job of highlighting interesting indie games, always with really appealing videos and GIFs and stuff. And it's stuff that, I try to stay pretty plugged into that community, but stuff that is often taking me by surprise. So they're good at the deep dives. But they posted a game called Hair Lab 2D, which is a not meant to be a realistic haircutting game and not meant to be clumsy in the Octodad style, but has a very appealing art style. I don't even know if I could describe it. It's kind of...
Yeah, it's like psychedelic.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. There's kind of a head, non-natural colors for everything, and hair that you can cut and shape into any way that you like, but it's all very kind of like flowing colors. And
yeah, the hair almost looks like fire or like a particle system or something, which I guess is like how hair really is in many games.
Yeah, but it looks very cool. And I just thought it's kind of a fun point of reference for this pitch.
One of the things I do like about the sort of Octodad angle of this, and maybe you slap in a little hybrid Surgeon Simulator-esque interaction in there too. Imagine the Octodad running a full barbershop, right? Having to give straight razor shaves. I'm sure that would get us into some Sweeney Todd-like territory. And obviously doing the sending someone to the shampoo station where you got to kind of clean their hair out and maybe make conversation with them. I think it's a lot of the best part about the barbershop setting for me is that it's a lot of that good fictional conceit to have people do a lot of talking to you and you not necessarily talking to them.
It's not usually the way it is when I'm getting a haircut. I try to stay pretty quiet.
And just look disapprovingly at the hairdresser.
I don't know. I always just like, please don't start any small talk because I don't know if I have it in me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm curious. I think there's a certain amount of fun to be had with a haircut going wrong. Obviously, it's something that we see quite often in comedy movies, like great physical comedies like Mr. Bean or Paddington 2, or I guess typically British comedies, I guess. Come to think of it. But it does seem like, you are also using razors and scissors and stuff near somebody's head and ears, and it just feels like there's a lot of opportunity for it to go much more wrong than we're usually used to seeing it go wrong. So like, how do you, do we get into can you
murder
people, or are we trying to keep this pretty PG? There's only so wrong you can go with a haircut. If you end up, cutting off a little bit more than you have to, you just shave the head and they're bald, and that's another acceptable hairstyle. So, it's like,
right.
It's only so far you can go.
I think if you had a system where potentially these people, let's lean into the absurdity of it. Maybe you can, nick an artery every once in a while and blood is getting all over the place, but you're always just like a fresh towel and some pressure away from closing up that problem. I think you also get into the reason why I've got the Surgeon Simulator model in my head is because as much as the Octodad thing is funny, I think Octodad is also funny because it strikes the exact right middle ground between macro interactions like walk over here and micro interactions from the beginning of the game, just make a couple burgers on the grill, right? Even that level of dexterity feels like a challenge to a new player. So I almost wonder if you take hey, clean this comb, and you got to get it in that blue water that I've never known what that stuff is. But you get you'd have to almost zoom in, right, to have that sort of Octodad physics-y sort of stuff.
Here's an option. We could do kind of a quarantine haircut where you have to keep 6 feet of distance, and so essentially you're working with hyperextended arms.
Oh,
whether it's kind of those bendy arms that you get as a toy, those extendo arms, or whatever. Whether your character just has long Octodad arms, and maybe again this is a VR type of thing where you can control your arms, but it's far away, and so it's a little difficult to see and measure everything out. And just kind of holding, trying to balance something on the end of a broomstick, it's difficult to control precisely in the same way that if you were to just do it with your own hands right in front of you. And so, it gives you that level of clumsiness. It gives you a level of kind of obscurity of vision in a way. And and then maybe you have to kind of like reach in to grab other, shavers and combs and scissors and stuff like that to give you, some additional tools to use and challenges throughout. And so you're just trying to give people normal haircuts. It's just that you are kind of obscured by your long ass Slenderman type of arms.
Oh man, Slenderman running a barbershop he's kind of already in a suit, right? That's he's a stately gentleman. Okay, so we're far away. Maybe I'm giving a haircut from a distance. There's got to be like maybe some. I like the idea of almost an RC car remote or something that can control the chair that the person's on electronically, that you have to like keep going back to like operate the chairs up and down and turn left, turn right controls. And I think like adding a time pressure mechanic in some way could make it more of a structured game challenge. I feel like Octodad doesn't do time, does it, or does it?
I'm trying to remember if there are any timed challenges. I know there's escape sequences where you're trying to run away from something, but right. And I think there is kind of like a speedrun mode as like a special challenge after you beat the game. But I don't think there are many, at least specifically timed challenges.
Because I think for the sake of comedy, if you do you can kind of give mostly any haircut you want, and you can nick people, but throwing a towel on the wound is kind of good enough to stop it, or you got to powder up someone's face or like brush off all the hair in their face. Like, as long as the person in the chair sounds like they're being perfectly pleasant to you, I think it'll still fire of like, oh, that's a bit more than I was expecting off the top, as you're kind of just going to town on their head with no hair left.
Yeah, I mean, I would like if it's kind of a system like The Sims, where even if you mess up, they're not going to stop you from doing your job, but they might give you kind of a disapproving rating at the end of it. And so you're trying to, get as close as possible to the cut that they asked for. And I mean, you might actually learn a thing or two about hair cutting in the process.
Yeah,
It'd be nice if we had like a really robust hair sim in here, but I know how difficult, like that's one of the most difficult things to do in computers.
Yeah, I keep imagining the very first part of this is because you have to be at a distance is like opening up a hair catalog for someone and letting them sort of gesture to the one that they want.
Yeah.
And kind of going from there.
Yeah, all right. I think that's about enough time on that one. Give it a name. I mean, I think Quarantine Cuts is kind of a fun alliteration, or at least alliterative sound.
I don't want to use this name yet because I feel like it can be for something that we both go far deeper on, but I love the idea of having a game called Mrs. Octodad or Ms. Octodad, just in the style of Pac-Man. The vastly superior sequel to Octodad, right?
I like that. Just like Pac-Man, it's not Octomom, it's Miss Octodad.
Yeah, that's right. But Quarantine Cut, if the comedy conceit is that Slender Man is giving these haircuts, so we have extra long arms, we could do like Slender Cuts or something like that.
Barber Man.
Slender Pole?
Slender Pole.
It's like the...
That would lead me to expect something else, I think. Maybe that's just me, I don't know.
It is just you. Man, Quarantine Cuts is not bad. I'm trying to think of like Super Cuts or what's that other place? Sport Clips. Have you seen this Sport Clips place? Do you have those near you?
There's that kind of classic joke, the hair today, gone tomorrow.
Hair today, gone tomorrow. That's nice.
Also, for the sake of formatting of titles, having commas in our titles does make it a little bit difficult to parse.
Yeah, that's true. Hair today, comma. What if you did gone tomorrow, hair today? Is that weirder?
So it's just the same thing, but more difficult to...
More difficult to say. There's got to be something here. You're going into... you've heard phrases like, I'm getting my ears lowered or ears raised?
Yeah, ears lowered, I think it is. The ear lower.
What do they say? It's like the... What if you just called it something like clean and smooth? Like you're just describing a shave.
Let's see. Let's think about barber. I think there's fun to be had with that word.
Because I was getting into like whisker nipper, but that sounds like a game starring a cat. What about Barbinger of Doom?
Barbinger of Doom. That's pretty funny.
At least it got a chuckle anyway.
I like it. I was also going to say Barber are us, and it could be read out barbarous, but I think we have two funny options there. I like.
Well, I might leave it to you to choose one or insert a colon somewhere in there and get.
All right, we'll choose wisely, and you'll see in the show notes what we went with. Anyways, thank you, Mike Esguerra, for sending that one in. It's always fun to do a hair-related pitch. Yeah, if you would like to submit an idea of your own, and we encourage you to do so, we're always eager to read video game ideas from some of our listeners throughout throughout the show. You can do so by emailing us, playwrightcast@gmail.com. You can go to playwrightcast.com/pitch, or you can tweet us at playwrightcast.
Special thank you to Protodome for the use of our theme song, Hello World, off the album Blue Noise. Go check out the other great shows on the Cane and Rinse network, like Cane and Rinse, The Sausage Factory, and Sound of Play. I've never heard of that show, but I assume it's good.
Yeah, it's okay. It has its moments. I think every other show is pretty good.
Okay.
That's a good 50%.
Oh, that's really good.
Not going to tell you which 50, though.
Exactly.
All right. Let's
owe you.
Let's end the show with a redacted video game pitch. What are you challenging me with today?
Okay, here we go.
You stumped me last time, so let's see how we can.
Stumped you last time. If I stump you with this one, you're really going to kick yourself, by the way.
Okay.
All right.
Conker's Bad Fur Day.
Yes.
Wait, Really?
You're kidding me. I didn't even get to say it. Yes, I picked Conker's Bad Fur Day for you. Holy shit.
I thought, what would be the one game I would be most mad at myself for not getting?
Well, this is why we do this game, folks. This is magic moments right here.
Well, folks, there you have it. We redacted the entire section from today's show.
Holy shit. Okay, let me at least read the redacted to you because I want to see if you would get it.
I'll act surprised.
Yeah, thank you. The day after his redacted sporting the worst hangover ever, and he just can't seem to find his way home. Prepare to stagger through redacted.
I would have gotten this.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. I was thinking about redacting hangover as well. Sporting the worst redacted ever, and he just can't seem to find his way home. Prepare to stagger through redacted, and redacted scenarios, crammed full of bad manners, twisted humor, and redacted. Unless you're a fan of violence, redacted, you best steer clear of this one.
Unless you're a fan of violence, are the other two things like poop and British humor?
It's violence, foul language, and racy innuendo.
Okay, all right.
Wow, look at this. All right, you've read my mind too much on that one. I'm gonna have to pick something that is somewhere in between the one that stumped you and this next time, and I'll see what I can do.
I think there's a nice middle ground of video games where it's everyone knows that they exist. You can't be mad. Something like San Francisco Rush. It's I'm not going to be mad at you for picking it because it's I know that game, but at the same time it's it's not one I would ever think of.
Yeah, I feel like I could even get into a Resident Evil-ish territory to stump the audience potentially, but I guess it's ideal when the person listening is yelling at their phone, but we're stumped. Hey, I also want to say this, on a, we ended on this kind of barn burner, but we've been doing this show for 3+ years. I continue to be so thankful to come here week after week and be able to explore something that has that demands the sort of depth and understanding and deference that the pitch today had. And I know that I'm not the progenitor of these ideas. I'm not the person who needs to shepherd them along or whatever, but I can't help but wonder and win some of those choices, seeing studios who are doing big things take on more risky stuff. And so thank you for being my partner through this and exploring these things with me.
Well, absolutely. I mean, as is video game tradition, of course, there is zero politics in anything that we...
Yeah, right.
No, that's not true. We're not playing the Ubisoft card of creating obviously political games and then claiming complete and utter neutrality.
Actually, after the past couple months, one might argue that the Ubisoft card might be entirely different at this point, but we could, that's for another show at another time and place.
But yeah, it is fun to come along here. And at least like, I feel like even if obviously the big game studios probably aren't listening to our podcast, taking notes, and then going off and creating multi-million-dollar budget games on the backs of what we suggest. But, perhaps even just kind of like putting the little whisper in somebody's ear helps foster an idea that grows into something bigger and better, or maybe, an idea that we have, ends up kind of circulating around at conventions or something. I don't know.
Right.
So, even if we're just kind of putting that energy out into the world.
Right. Connected an idea to a mechanic in a way that a creator was stumped and they needed just a little extra edge to take their idea over the edge. And that'd be great.
Yep. Any little contribution that we can have to making video games in the world a better place. We're happy for that. But anyways, until next week, thank you again for listening and joining us as well on this journey. We could not do this without our loyal listener base and anyone who decides to find us in the future. We'll catch you again next week.
Bye.